Started. So, welcome everybody to our Green Amendments for Climate and Clean Energy Forum. It's really great that we had so many folks sign up to watch this forum live and to watch the recording after the fact. It's really exciting. For those of you who don't know, my name is Maya Vemrasam. I'm the founder of the Green Amendments for the Generations organization and movement, and I actually coined the term and defined the term the Green Amendment in the first edition of my book titled The Green Amendment. I'm joined by a wonderful panel of experts, lawyers, and legislators and activists who are all going to talk about the many ways that Green Amendments really help us advance critical protections when it comes to climate change, including advancing good quality clean energy projects. Every time a speaker comes up to the podium, so to speak, they're going to introduce themselves for you. After we hear all the presentations, we're going to take as many questions as we can. So I'm going to encourage you, as you're watching the program, if a question comes to your mind, put it in the chat. Shaylin Parker from the Green Amendments for the Generations team is going to be monitoring the chat and leading our Q&A session at the end. But I first, going into today's forum, I wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page about what a Green Amendment actually is. So let's just look at the definition. A Green Amendment is a self-executing provision that's placed in the Declaration of Rights or Bill of Rights section of a Constitution that recognizes and protects the inalienable rights of all people, including future generations, to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, including environmental essentials like clean water and clean air, a safe climate, healthy soils, ecosystems, flora, fauna, biodiversity, and environments. In addition, the best Green Amendments include a clear statement of government's duty to protect the state's natural resources for the benefit of the people. Green Amendments apply to all government action and every level of government within the state. So if any governmental body or official gets their authority initially from the power of the state, then they are subject to the constitutional obligation to protect Green Amendment rights. Every Green Amendment is an environmental rights amendment, but not every environmental rights amendment is a Green Amendment. Green Amendments are a special type of environmental rights amendment that meets certain criteria, a certain definition that I've laid out. And I'm sure that there's a link being placed in the chat if you want to learn more about those specific criteria and actually see examples of Green Amendment language. But I make this point because actually many states have language in their constitutions that talk about environmental protection or even talk about environmental rights. But when we look at how these various environmental rights amendments or Green Amendments are used in advocacy and legal actions, what we can see is that it's the amendments that meet the definition of a Green Amendment that are proving to be the most successful and effective in actually securing and enforcing the inalienable human rights of all people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, whether that progress is happening in the courts or out of the courts. At this point, this is the lay of the land when it comes to Green Amendments in the United States. There are 3 states that have Green Amendments already: Pennsylvania, Montana, and most recently the state of New York. But there are 19 states where a Green Amendment proposal has already been put forth and is at one point or another in the process of advancing to actually being passed and secured. And there are over half a dozen other states where Green Amendments are on the way. Now, why are we here today having this forum focused on Green Amendments for the climate and clean energy? Well, we're here because industry opposition has been peddling a false narrative for the last couple of years, suggesting that Green Amendments are a problem when it comes to addressing the issue of climate change, including advancing good quality clean energy projects. And the truth is, nothing could be further from the truth. Green Amendments are a powerful tool for addressing critical protections when it comes to our climate, including good quality clean energy projects. So we are here today to set the record straight and empower all of you with the true facts about how and why Green Amendments are a powerful opportunity for addressing climate change and the climate crisis. And with that, I am going to pass the podium over to Senator Harold Pope from New Mexico.
Thank you, Maya. Once again, I'm Senator Harold Pope Jr. from New Mexico. I represent Senate District 23, Northwest Albuquerque, Bernalillo County. The Green Amendment is a transformative opportunity for New Mexico, promising a future where environmental protection is not just a priority, but a constitutional right. As a state deeply intertwined with the oil and gas industry, New Mexico has witnessed firsthand the economic benefits of economic development, but also the environmental and social costs. Our landscapes, water resources, and air quality have been disproportionately impacted, often with frontline communities being the brunt of these effects, while the broader population benefits. The Green Amendment seeks to change this dynamic by embedding the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment into New Mexico's Constitution. This is not merely symbolic. It's a practical tool for holding industries and governments accountable, ensuring that economic development moves hand in hand with environmental stewardship. The amendment's core value lies in its potential to foster a more sustainable and an equitable future for all New Mexicans. Transitioning to clean energy is not just a goal, it's an urgent necessity. New Mexico's vast renewable energy potential positions us to lead the nation in solar and wind power. By ensuring a constitutional framework for environmental justice, the Green Amendment will drive the development of high-quality, clean energy projects that benefit every community. It will ensure that our shift to renewable does not replicate the historical injustices of the fossil fuel era, where marginalized communities suffered the greatest harm. For example, consider the San Juan Basin, where decades of oil and gas extraction have left behind polluted water and soil, along with economic instability as fossil fuel demand declines. A Green Amendment would provide the tools to prevent such scenarios in the future, requiring proactive measures to protect communities and remediate damages. Similarly, the amendment could serve as a guiding principle for new energy projects, such as the wind farms being developed in eastern New Mexico, to ensure their benefits reach all residents and avoid localized harm. The Green Amendment will also hold industries accountable for advancing in ways that align with the state's environmental and public health goals. It empowers communities with the legal standing to challenge projects or practices that threaten their environment, ensuring equitable protections across rural, urban, and indigenous populations. By doing so, New Mexico can pursue economic growth without incurring the devastating costs of environmental degradation. This effort is not about stifling economic development. It's about ensuring development that sustains both our people and our environment. Clean energy projects supported the Green Amendment, supported by the Green Amendment, will create jobs, foster innovation, and reduce dependence on industries that harm our natural resources. More importantly, they will demonstrate that the economic progress and environmental integrity are mutually exclusive, but mutually enforcing. I'm proud to lead this effort in the New Mexico Senate to secure the Green Amendment because I believe in its promise to create a healthier, more equitable future. This is a pivotal moment for our state to establish a legacy of environmental protection and sustainable growth. By passing the Green Amendment, New Mexico will stand as a beacon of hope and leadership in the fight for environmental justice and climate resilience. Thank you all for being here this morning, those that are going to watch this recording, and thank you for the support. With that, I will pass it over to the House sponsor, Representative Ferrari.
So actually, Representative Ferrari is going to close out our panel. But Senator,
my apologies.
I want to thank you so much for sharing that really powerful foundation and perspective from New Mexico and from yourself as a legislator leading this effort in one of our critical Green Amendment states. So my job, For those of us who joined late, or who want to know a little bit more about me, again, my name's Maya Van Rossum. I'm the founder of the Green Amendments for the Generations organization and movement. I'm the author of the book, The Green Amendment, The People's Fight for a Clean, Safe, and Healthy Environment, now in its second edition. And it's actually in this book where I coined and defined the term a Green Amendment. I've also had the honor for the last 30 plus years of serving as the Delaware Riverkeeper and leader of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. I'm an environmental advocate and an environmental attorney. And I had this vision for this National Green Amendment movement as a result of that over 30 years of environmental advocacy and legal work. I've experienced, as many of you have, the myriad of ways that our current system of environmental protection laws in the United States of America fundamentally fails to protect critical aspects of our environment, and certainly fails to respect and protect the inalienable human right of all people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. But also through this work, I've experienced how a properly framed and placed constitutional amendment, what I now call a Green Amendment, can make a critical difference for communities fighting to protect their environment, fighting to protect their environmental rights, and fighting to protect their families and their communities. And that's why in 2014, just over 10 years ago, I founded the National Green Amendment movement. My job with this presentation is going to be to try and explain exactly how and why green amendments are such a powerful tool for addressing climate change, including advancing good quality clean energy projects. When a green amendment gets added to a state constitution, there are actually two elements that really come to bear on environmental rights definition and protection. Green amendments create a substantive right of the people to a clean and healthy environment, and they also create an obligation on all government officials to ensure that they are engaging in informed decision making. The people of the state are entitled to have both of these aspects of a green amendment fully respected and fully implemented. So let's dig in a little bit more on what each of these elements are. Let's begin with the substantive right. Green amendments recognize and protect the inalienable human right of all people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, including clean water and clean air, a safe climate, healthy soils, flora, fauna, ecosystems, and environments. By virtue of the fact that we have a green amendment in a state, these environmental rights actually become constitutionally enforceable, like any other fundamental right that we have learned about through the entirety of our lives here in the United States of America. We all know that if there is an infringement by government actors or activities on our private property rights, that we, the people, can take meaningful action through advocacy and, if necessary, through litigation to protect our private property rights, and if necessary, if they've been taken from us, to have those rights restored. When a green amendment gets added to our state constitution, that same kind of power comes to bear for the right of the people to clean water, clean air, a safe climate, and healthy environments. If these fundamental rights are infringed upon or taken from us by government action, we, the people, can take meaningful action through advocacy and, if necessary, through the courts to restore our environmental rights and to ensure that they are protected moving forward. With a green amendment in place, government entities may not infringe on the environmental rights of the people. They must proactively protect our environmental rights. And if government decisions require a balancing of competing interests or rights, then when that balancing takes place, government officials must include the environmental rights and environmental protection in that balancing of rights, right? The environment must be an active part of that decision-making process by government officials. Now, just as government may not directly themselves infringe on the environmental rights of the people through their actions or activities, government is also prohibited from empowering other third parties to unconstitutionally infringe on environmental rights. Government may not empower a third party to, for example, infringe on the right of the people to clean water or clean air. Government seeking to empower a third party in that way would be an unconstitutional governmental act if it cannot meet constitutional muster. Now, when there is a Green Amendment in place, government officials must address the issue of climate change. And that's for 3 reasons. First off, in many states right now where a Green Amendment is being proposed, the climate is specifically mentioned as part of the fundamental right of the people in that Green Amendment language. So it's very clear on the face of the amendment that the right of the people to a safe climate and or the duty of government officials to address climate change must be carried forward by virtue of the Green Amendment. But there are some amendments in place now and or that are being proposed where climate is not specifically mentioned. But the duty to address climate change still comes into play by virtue of the Green Amendment language. And that's because the climate, right, and climate change has broad implications for all aspects of our environment. Climate change is responsible for water pollution and air pollution, death and decimation of critical ecosystems, for example. So if government officials are going to fulfill their constitutional obligation to protect the rights of the people to clean water and clean air, they necessarily have to address the issue of climate change. And we also have a third reason, how and why Green Amendments bring forth the responsibility of government officials to address climate change, and that's legal precedent. Most recently out of the state of Montana, but we also have some helpful language out of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that makes very, very clear if you have a Green Amendment in place in the state, the right of the people to a clean and healthy environment includes the right of the people to a safe and stable climate. Green Amendments also recognize and protect the inalienable human rights of future generations to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, including a safe climate. And by virtue of the Green Amendment placement in the Bill of Rights and by virtue of Green Amendment language, this right of future generations must be equitably protected. Their rights must be protected on par with those of us who are here today. This right of future generations to a clean, safe, and healthy environment is in fact enforceable. And we have demonstrated that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And given that government action taken today can meaningfully impact individually and cumulatively the degree of climate change experienced by future generations, a Green Amendment constitutionally obligates government to consider and address the climate change impacts of their actions and decisions that they are taking today. They must consider and address both the near term and the long term, including cross-generational impacts of their actions for water, for air, for ecosystems, and for the climate. Now, I want to be clear, when you have a Green Amendment in place, the obligation on government is not to stop or avert climate change or climate crisis writ large. We all know that action within just one state of the United States of America cannot possibly do that. And that is not the duty that is being created by the passage of a Green Amendment. When a Green Amendment is added to a state constitution, the obligation is to ensure that government fulfills their constitutional obligations to respect, protect, and not infringe upon the right of the people of the state, including future generations, to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, including a safe, stable, and livable climate. The Green Amendment speaks to the actions and the activities of the government officials within that state as they are taking their action and creates a responsibility to ensure they are not infringing on environmental rights, including the rights to a safe climate. It is not about solving climate change writ large. So now let's talk about the duty of informed decision-making. With a Green Amendment in place, government officials become constitutionally obliged to undertake a thorough review of the impacts of their proposed government actions for the environment, for environmental rights and for their obligations to protect their state's natural resources. And this thorough review must take place before the proposed government action or activity is implemented. This pre-action review is among the rights the people secure when a Green Amendment is added to their state constitution, and it is in fact enforceable. If government fails to undertake this necessary thorough review, there could be a constitutional question regarding the validity of the action. Now, informed decision-making is a really good thing, right? It means that the full ramifications, good and bad, of government actions are known before the government acts. It means that good government action can be supported, but problematic government action can be prevented if necessary or modified to ensure the action can take place while environmental rights are being protected at the same time. This pre-action analysis ensures that environmental harms are identified earlier in the decision-making process, when they can be more easily addressed, minimized, or avoided by modifications, whether it's modifications to a piece of legislation or modifications to a proposed permit. These modifications, because they're happening earlier in the decision-making process, are more accessible and generally less costly. This pre-action analysis might also demonstrate that the environmental ramifications of a proposed action are so severe that that action or activity should not be allowed to take place, that it should be rejected, but that rejection can take place earlier in the process before there's an irretrievable commitment of resources, whether that's financial resources or other resources, and before there's irreversible environmental harm that's allowed to be inflicted. This robust pre-action analysis, this strengthened environmental review that takes place by virtue of the Constitution, also means that if that government action is in fact challenged in court, that the government actors involved can have a stronger defense of the action or the decision that they took, because it's going to be based on a more robust record that looked more intensively into the benefits and or harms of the proposed action. And so there really will be a stronger information base upon which this government action can be defended in court if necessary. Now, when it comes to clean energy projects, by creating an environmental right of the people that must be upheld, including the right of present and future generations to a safe climate, and by ensuring robust review of the environmental and climate values of a clean energy project, Green Amendments become a solid foundation for the approval of good quality clean energy projects. For problematic clean energy projects, the duty to protect environmental rights and undertake that robust review means that, again, government can identify unacceptable harms sooner in the process, when they can be more easily and cost effectively avoided or minimized through a changed decision or a changed mandate or requirement or a process by which that project will move forward. Or it might mean that there is a determination that the project is going to have such a significant environmental impact that the project should be rejected. But this rejection can also happen sooner, before there is a significant investment in the project and or before it causes irreversible harm. And I think we all have to acknowledge that when we take action that avoids harm, we tend to avoid opposition as well. For clean energy projects that do find themselves being challenged in the courts, the fact that the government has a duty to advance solutions that will protect the rights of present and future generations to a safe climate, and that approval of a proposed project is in service to that duty, And that in addition, there has been a robust review into the benefits and potential harms of the project. And if necessary, steps taken to reduce those harms. It means that the supporters of the project will be in a stronger position to defend the project, again, if they find themselves being challenged in the courts. They will be able to defend more firmly, more robustly the proposed project and the government approvals and or permits that were issued that are allowing that project to move forward. Now, I do want to know, like, what if there is a clean energy project where the footprint is deemed to be so big, so massive that it will necessarily result in an infringement of the environmental rights of the people of the state? Does that mean that that project can never move forward? No, it doesn't. Because under constitutional law, if an action or activity, proposed government action or activity is being taken in order to address a compelling state interest, and I would suggest to you that addressing the climate crisis is a compelling state interest, and if the government can demonstrate that the action was narrowly tailored in order to serve that compelling state interest, in other words, efforts were taken to minimize the level of the infringement on the right of the people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, to minimize that environmental footprint, to ensure that avoidable harms were in fact avoided, then that project can still be approved and move forward. You just need to make sure, right, that the government has done their work to have demonstrated that this project will in fact meaningfully help address the climate crisis, and again, that efforts were made to avoid unnecessary harm. Now, I do want to highlight, I'm not going to dig in too fully, there is case law on it, but that just the pursuit of profits or economic development are not the kind of interests that can be utilized to trump environmental rights. Now, I want to do one final sort of reality check before I finish my presentation, and this is being mindful of the claims of the industry opposition. First off, we want to note that not all clean energy projects are alike. Some do, in fact, need adjustment, right? They aren't necessarily good projects when they walk in the door, but with a little bit of good work, they can be turned into good projects that are really making a difference for the climate, while at the same time best honoring environmental protection and the environmental rights of the people. And that kind of adjustment, that kind of modification to take a project and make it even better is a good outcome that can be the result of the existence of a green amendment in a state. We also have to recognize that there are already legal challenges to stop wind and solar projects that are taking place. And these legal challenges are taking place under a variety of legal theories that have nothing to do with a green amendment. Nothing to do with a green amendment. But by virtue of a green amendment creating a duty to respect and protect environmental rights, including a duty to protect the rights of present and future generations to a safe climate, and by ensuring a robust review of projects to support government approvals for those projects, regardless of the legal theory that's being used to challenge a green energy project in court, green amendments can actually strengthen the defense of these good quality clean energy projects. I want to note that when we look at the case law in Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York, green amendments are not being used to stop wind or solar clean energy projects. That's simply not taking place. And I also want to note, when we look across the cases, green amendment climate cases are in fact focused on advancing helpful climate policies, programs, and laws, including policies, programs, and laws that are good for helping to advance good quality clean energy projects. So that is a good outcome for the climate, and that is also a good outcome for clean energy. The long and the short of it is, green amendments are good for people, they're good for the environment, they're good for the climate, and they're good for those who are seeking to advance good quality clean energy. So with that, I am going to pass the podium over to Casey Manahan.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the presentation. My name is Casey Manahan. I'm a senior attorney with Delaware Riverkeeper Network and Green Amendments for the Generations. I practice law in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and at the federal level. So in my day-to-day work, I have experience with Pennsylvania's Green Amendment. And my presentation today, which I'm going to share with you right now, is about exactly, Maya spoke about how these projects are going to be subject to review under the Green Amendment by government. So this presentation is a little bit more detail on what that might look like.
Hey, Casey, I think that we've lost your audio if something changed on your end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, what is the last thing you heard me say?
You were pulling up the slides.
Oh, apologies.
No worries.
So as Maya mentioned, green amendments drive governments to address climate change, and they're going to be doing that through policies, laws, plans. Agencies might come up with plans for how to address climate change, and inevitably that will involve adoption of clean energy. And as we know, that adoption is going to have to be rapid, but there are some risks associated with rapid adoption of new technologies, as we've seen in the past, causing environmental degradation. For example, coal mining, most recently fracking for natural. We saw that in Pennsylvania, especially. There was really a huge natural gas boom in the aughts, and that has caused a massive amount of environmental degradation at the locations where the natural gas was fracked, and also overall to our environment due to the release of methane, which is an extremely potent greenhouse gas, and even more potent than carbon on a short-term scale. And the proliferation of automobiles, right? Automobiles started in the early 20th century. They were kind of a novelty, but then by the mid 20th century, almost every family had one, and now almost every individual has one. So we can see that the rapid adoption of technology has a lot of consequences that maybe folks didn't anticipate at the time they were adopted. And you can see on this slide, I included a quote from Robinson Township versus Commonwealth, which was a case where Delaware Riverkeeper Network advanced a theory that really overhauled Pennsylvania's view of the Green Amendment. For years in Pennsylvania, the Green Amendment was interpreted incorrectly, completely differently from how the people and how the proponents of the Green Amendment in 1970 had intended it to be interpreted. So Robinson Township was really the first case where the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, "Wait a minute, this is supposed to be an extremely meaningful constitutional provision that guides government decision making." So I'll just read the quote aloud here because I think it's worth reflecting on in thinking about how green amendments play a role in the review of new technology and clean energy. So it says Pennsylvania has a notable history of what appears retrospectively to have been a short-sighted exploitation of its bounteous environment, affecting its minerals, its water, its air, its flora and fauna, and its people. The lessons learned from that history led directly to the Environmental Rights Amendment, also known as the Green Amendment, a measure which received overwhelming support from legislators and voters alike. So an example of the kinds of questions that government entities should be and will be asking themselves in reviewing projects under the Green Amendment is whether the technology is really clean. So does the technology perpetuate the use of fossil fuels? For example, I have here some graphics, two technologies that have been touted recently that actually are born from the fossil fuel industry, such as hydrogen and carbon capture and sequestration. So really, carbon capture and sequestration is, in many cases, in most cases, is a way to allow for the continued use of fossil fuels. And hydrogen, a lot of hydrogen is made from methane, so made from fossil fuels. Another question that a government may ask itself is whether the technology comes with environmentally harmful byproducts or side effects. Again, the hydrogen development of hydrogen comes with safety risks because hydrogen is a very small molecule subject to leaking. It can be explosive. Combustion of hydrogen, if a project involves the combustion of hydrogen, results in NOx emissions, which are harmful to health. Carbon capture and sequestration involves putting carbon in a supercritical state, which is kind of like between a liquid and a gas, into rock formations in the earth. And recently, I believe it was in Texas, there was a leak that was a leak from one of these carbon wells, which not only does it reintroduce the carbon to the atmosphere, but it can also hurt people and cause suffocation. Another question that a government might ask itself is, will use of this technology create path dependencies? And path dependencies, which can also be referred to as lock-in, means if you choose to adopt this technology today, and if we choose to adopt this technology around the state, are we going to be locked into using something that ends up being environmentally harmful? For example, natural gas, right? Or automobiles. It's hard to imagine a world where we don't have cars at this point. So will decisions we make now affect future generations? There's that intergenerational component of the Green Amendment where the government has to look on an extremely long timeline and see how will these decisions we're making today affect future generations of Pennsylvanians and New Yorkers and Montanans and hopefully your state. So again, hydrogen and carbon capture are examples of energies that may be called clean energy, or technologies that may be referred to as clean energy, but really deserve some additional scrutiny. Some of you may have heard about hydrogen having different colors, right? It's calling blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, orange hydrogen, pink hydrogen, and that's all goes back to how the hydrogen is made. So for example, pink hydrogen is made with nuclear energy. Green hydrogen is made with renewable energy such as wind and solar. Blue hydrogen is made with natural gas with carbon capture technologies. And then gray hydrogen, which is the cheapest form of hydrogen, is just made with natural gas. So assuming a project is actually a clean energy project and doesn't fall into any of those pitfalls we mentioned earlier, will the clean energy project cause other environmental harm? Maybe environmental harm that isn't intrinsic to the technology itself, but has to do with the project. So for example, a project that could be sited in a community that is already overburdened with industry, technology, effects on their daily lives, and the Green Amendment, because of the need to protect the rights equitably, the project will need to pass that test. Does it protect the rights equitably? Are we overburdening a community that is already subject to environmental degradation? Whether the site preparation, construction, or operation involves destruction of sensitive resources. For example, a solar farm that is sited in a forest. If the project proponent wants to cut down an old growth forest to site their solar farm because that old growth forest is on a sunny side of a hill, that type of environmental degradation might be unacceptable. to the project, and they might say, hey, you need to site this in a different location, maybe on a farm field or somewhere that's already been developed. Wind projects, they're sited in the ocean, and there might be sensitive coral reefs, sensitive habitat in the ocean, or in a body of water, a bay, something like that, and they might need to be sited to avoid those areas. And I think we see commonly in solar projects stormwater impacts, because there are sometimes solar projects that are proposed that have a lot of impervious surfaces or involve cutting of vegetation, and that can affect the flow of stormwater. Whether it can increase the flow of stormwater, it can increase the potential for that stormwater to include contaminants before it's ultimately discharged to a stream or wetland or river. So the Green Amendment lens, when looking at these projects, as Maya mentioned, there's an information forcing aspect of Green Amendments because the government is forbidden from infringing on the environmental rights. The government needs to inform itself ahead of time of what type of impacts its action is going to have. So this pre-decisional evaluation of a project's impacts is going to drive answers to the questions that we mentioned before. As I stated before, equitable protection of the individual environmental rights means that the government has to avoid violating a certain person's environmental rights in favor of promoting the environmental rights of others. The extra long timeline that the government has to consider in adopting these new technologies or citing a project, the project might be there. For example, a lot of energy projects today, like natural gas pipelines, are going to be there 50 years in the future. Are we still going to be using this? Do we want to be using this technology 50 years in the future? Are we going to want this technology to become a major part of our energy mix, or are we going to want to limit it for specific uses? And again, for things like stormwater siting, stuff like that, the government has the authority and ability to identify that ahead of time in their pre-decisional evaluation and mitigate those impacts prior to approval. So they can say, yes, you may build this, but you need to include these stormwater protections, or this project can't be sited in this sensitive location. And the applicant might then look for other sites to site their project. And for Green Amendments that do have trustee language, not all of them do, but some do, the trustee language reinforces that protection of environmental rights because it helps inform the government's duties in managing the natural resources in the state. So in Pennsylvania, for example, the public natural resources are owned by the people, and the government has certain fiduciary duties, such as loyalty, prudence, and impartiality that it needs to consider before it makes a decision affecting public natural resources. And here, as an example of a Green Amendment case in New York, the state of New York, challenging a solar project. And in this case, this neighborhood group, they rely on a lake for their drinking water, and the construction of the solar project was going to increase stormwater flows to that lake. They were challenging a decision by the Industrial Development Agency to provide funding for this project. And you can see here in this clip that this screenshot, they say that we don't oppose the project. That we merely seek to ensure that the project construction and operation doesn't contaminate our lake. And I think that's a fair ask. These projects can be constructed in ways that avoid these types of impacts, and this is what the plaintiffs were asking for in this case. They wanted additional testing for the stormwater. This case, ultimately, you can see a little asterisk there. The Green Amendment issue was not decided because the court determined that the public service law barred their claims. and it's currently on appeal. But this is an example of how community members can use a Green Amendment to protect their rights and to improve and refine a otherwise beneficial clean energy project. So thank you so much for joining me on my Green Amendment review journey, and I'm going to pass it on to John Smith.
Okay. Thank you, Casey. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is exactly like it looks and sounds, is John Smith. I'm an attorney in the Pittsburgh area, focusing on land use, municipal law, as well as working with oil and gas issues and solar issues. My presentation today as an attorney is going to be several-fold. First, I want to discuss with you about how I've used the Pennsylvania's Green Amendment in court, in litigation. I represent local governments. I'm going to explain to you how local governments themselves are using it today. And I represent solar industries in Pennsylvania, and I want to discuss with you their thoughts on Pennsylvania's Green Amendment and how it is by no means an impediment to doing business in the state of Pennsylvania or in the Commonwealth. So Maya and Casey have done a nice job of sort of teeing up what a Green Amendment is. So in Pennsylvania, we have Article 1, Section 27, and I believe Maya talked about the fact that the suggestion that at least that the Green Amendment should be in a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is in our Article 1, and it's easy to think about is the equivalent of the First Amendment, the right to free speech. So when governments act, they typically look at, are we going to violate First Amendment rights? So we've put into their world the idea, are we going to violate citizens' rights to clean air and pure water? Same thought process, right? It has the same right that's absolute, that remains the rights of the citizens that we have to evaluate. Now, in the Robinson Delaware Riverkeepers case, where I was lead counsel, Maya Van Rossum was actually a plaintiff along with the Delaware Riverkeepers. And I want to give you just a quick background of that case. So a lot of people are somewhat fearful at times of passing an environmental rights amendment, but need to understand, when it works, that it doesn't bring vast amounts of litigation and how it's beneficial all the way around. In Pennsylvania, of course, we have a lot of Marcellus shale drilling, oil and gas activity everywhere. From my office, I bet you there is probably over 200 wells within a 5-mile radius, inclusive of different plants and processing facilities that were never here 10 years ago, 15 years ago. When the oil and gas industry came to town, as local government officials, we attempted to regulate them. And we attempted to regulate them by way of local ordinance, your typical things of setbacks, protections from homes, zoning districts, things along those lines. The industry didn't like that very much because they came from areas of the world that didn't have local regulation. And so they went to and curried favor with the state legislative body, who passed a law that said, local governments, you're forbidden from regulating oil and gas. And by the way, oil and gas is allowed as a permitted use in every single zoning district and every single municipality in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, as long as you're 500 feet from people's homes. We found that objectionable, and we challenged the law, and Maya Van Rossum insisted, as one of our challenges, which was never in place at the time in terms of how we looked at Article 1, Section 27, our Green Amendment, that we bring that as a challenge, that law was violative of the Constitution. And ultimately, Maya was correct, because it went up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and a Republican Chief Justice found that the law that took away local government's rights and basically treated every use the same in terms of, if you're going to drill next to a school, taking away topography, wind conditions as a factor of how far emissions will travel would serve to violate the people's right to clean air and pure water. And it was struck down as unconstitutional. Abby, what slide are we on? And within that, that was an occasion where, because we had the amendment, we could regulate the oil and gas industry from a local government standpoint. Importantly, there were 7 municipalities that challenged that law. Almost all of them were universally Republican municipalities. this was not a Democrat or Republican situation or idea. This was, we don't want our air or water affected in such a fashion that would cause problems. And if you ever asked yourself, go to the next slide, how it was that Pennsylvania has a green amendment. I think Casey touched upon this. But here, the Supreme Court Justice, and I won't read the whole thing, the highlighted said that the Commonwealth's experience of having the benefit of vast natural resources whose virtually unrestrained exploitation, while initially a boon to investors, industry, and citizens, led to destructive and lasting consequences, not only for the environment, but also for citizens' quality of life. So here's Pennsylvania, a blue-collar state. We have coal. We have steel mills everywhere. We have timbering. We have railroads. We have pipelines. This is the industry in Pennsylvania. And what did the citizens do? They saw what was happening. They saw what happened. Water was contaminated. The air was bad. You see pictures of the city of Pittsburgh back in the early part of the century, 19th century, where in the middle of the day, the lights are on because it looked like it was night out from all the smog. So the people who relied upon these industries for their livelihood voted overwhelmingly to create this right to clean air and pure water. And I think those of you that live in areas and states that don't have this need to go to school off Pennsylvania's history in that regard, because this wasn't a state that just was a farming state that didn't rely on this and they passed an amendment. This was a state that relied upon the very uses that they were looking to regulate and protect citizens' rights. Stay there, I'll go back one. So now at the local level, what do we see? We've seen these cases come up and people get all concerned that if you have an environmental rights amendment, it's going to lead to litigation. And I've not seen that. And again, I was the lawyer that, along with Maya and others, that brought the environmental rights case to its forefront. And we see it, and we see it when it's appropriate. And again, when you're going to basically lay down the laws. And how do we lay down the laws? I think we all well know it shouldn't depend upon what party's in office, what their mantra is about pro-business or pro-environment. The Environmental Rights Amendment stays there as an amendment. So we shouldn't have to worry about who's in office relative to our First Amendment rights, right? Because that's going to be decided by the courts, because there's a constitutional right that stays with the citizens. This is the same idea. At the municipal level, how we've utilized this, also beyond litigation, is important. So now when we pass ordinances that may affect, for instance, local, staying with the oil and gas industry, if we've passed local ordinances, in the past, we would not have brought in experts. Typically isn't done at the local level. But now we've brought in experts to explain to the elected officials who recognize that they better get this right, because they need to know in advance what the potential harms are from these uses that could affect their citizens' right to clean air and pure water. And so we bring in these experts and explain to us, what are we looking at? What are the potential perils? And how do we combat those? Are there conditions? Is there certain technology that we can mandate be employed to lessen that right? And the oil and gas industry is a good example, because there's a fear that if you have this amendment, industries won't be here. We are so heavily drilled in Pennsylvania, and there is a nonstop approach here that we continue to go forward and be drilled on a daily basis. And because of that, industry is not running away. They're dealing with it. They are working with the players at the local government level, at the state level, and they're working out scenarios where they try to comply. And they're not always going to comply, and we're not naive in that regard. But in the same vein, it is not an impediment for them doing business in the Commonwealth. The local governments at the township level, it's now, again, common for them when we look at the laws or we look at applicants to raise this. No different than First Amendment. It's now become commonplace for them to consider, well, how's this going to affect our water supplies? How is this going to affect the air? And some people say, well, we leave that to our state regulatory bodies. We leave that to our environmental protection agencies. And in some regards, that's okay. But to understand the difference between local government responsibilities and state agency responsibilities, first and foremost, the state agency is an executive branch agency, usually governed in part and appointed the head of it by the governor. So the governor is going to appoint the head of that agency, as we see at the federal level from Republican to Democrat. You see the industry people that get in when the Republicans are in, that are more pro anti-environmental regulation, and then more pro-environmental regulation on the Democratic side. Wherever party you may align yourselves with, that's typically the case. This amendment doesn't care. So here at the local level, we know the DEP is going to grant air permits, and that's great. They're looking at various things, but what people don't understand, it's the DEP is not looking to see whether there are going to be health effects of how far certain emissions may travel from site to site. So, for instance, the DEP may come in and say, you can only put off this many tons of volatile organic compounds. And I live 500 feet away, and I'm like, well, that's great. They're complying with federal and state law on how much they can put out. But I've sued the DEP. I've taken their depositions. They're not health-based people. They're looking at numbers, and they're not real sure, what the health effects are for people next door. That's where the local government comes in, recognizes their rights under the Environmental Rights Amendment, that their citizens have the right to clean air and pure water, and make sure that they appreciate that. Because your kitchen window doesn't discriminate between 21,000 tons of VOCs being healthy or unhealthy, and the DEP is only regulating that part. So there's an important part that now our local governments are understanding and they're employing because of the Environmental Rights Amendment and because it's self-effectuating, that this right to clean air and pure water, again, as soon as you think of it on par with the First Amendment, it's very simple to employ. But we're not seeing cases challenged on a daily basis, or it's greatly used that you violate my rights to clean air as a litigation boon. I've probably been involved since we did the Robinson Delaware River Keepers case, and maybe one other case where we've even mentioned the Environmental Rights Amendment. Now, I also, as I started off the conversations, represent solar companies, and I represent local governments and the police solar companies. And we're really not looking at the Environmental Rights Amendment in total. We know it's there, but because it's not putting out the same types of issues as oil and gas industry, we're looking more for setbacks from homes, setbacks from property lines, making sure we can control the glaring issues that may result, making sure that we have appropriate access roads and things, typical land use items. But Pennsylvania is now at the forefront of solar industry. So I bet you 5 years ago, you couldn't find an attorney that focused on solar panels or power in Pennsylvania because it was fleeting. You saw some here or there. I have a client recently, probably about 20 minutes south of Pittsburgh, maybe a little further, had 4 offers from 4 different solar companies to put a solar farm on his property. They're out there, they're doing business in the Commonwealth, and they don't find an impediment. Abby, change the slide, please. And I asked for a quote from, and I will read this, from one of my clients, Luminous Energy, that they have multiple projects in Pennsylvania in solar fields. And I asked before I read you the quote, does our Green Amendment affect you in any way in terms of, did you think twice about doing business in the Commonwealth? They said, not at all. They said, we're in the business of green energy. It's consistent with our mission statement. This is not something that we would look at. We'd be hypocritical if we were to look at a state that says, hey, you have the right to clean air and pure water, and we promote those rights, but we don't want to do business in your state. And what the quote, as I'll read, as a company focused on leasing land for solar development, we have found that Pennsylvania's Environmental Rights Amendment is consistent with our vision and desire to promote clean energy. We have multiple solar projects underway in Pennsylvania, and we continue to pursue more. Like all responsible companies, we invite reasonable regulation and find that Pennsylvania citizens constitutional rights to clean air and pure water is by no means an impediment to us doing business in the Commonwealth, but is consistent with our business mission and identity. These are people that get in the business because they recognize climate change. They recognize the benefit of clean industry. And again, in Pennsylvania, they are everywhere. There are companies that are popping up left and right. And when you have multiple offers on different projects, you can see that our environmental rights amendment is not an impediment by any means. So at the end of the day, just to wrap up and surmise, we have used the Green Amendment to protect the citizens. Without it, we could have drilling in every aspect and every corner of the Commonwealth without care of schools, hospitals, neighborhoods, property values, anything. Because Maya had the foresight to convince us to include the Environmental Rights Amendment as an argument, which again wasn't, regularly employed because it wasn't accepted as a constitutional amendment that had a lot of power until that case. And once that case has come down, it stopped industry from running over citizens' rights, but it didn't stop industry from doing business in the state. And you see that at the local government level. They do not see it as impediment. They invite it. They invite the oversight in terms of gives them the protection to say, people, why are you asking us? So we have to make sure our citizens' rights are protected. And again, with the solar industries, the ones I represent or the ones I'm involved with in terms of leasing, they do not find it problematic in any vein and continue to do business in the Commonwealth. So thank you for your time and hearing a little bit about my story in terms of how I deal with the Green Amendment. And I'm going to pass it on now to Shaylin Parker.
Thanks so much, John. I appreciate it. I'm now following that train of thought. I'm going to share a video from an actual solar developer who has experience in working alongside the Green Amendment. And I am Shaylin Parker. I am an advocate and educator for green amendments for the generations. I'll show this video, another one later, and then I'll pop back in for the Q&A. Hopefully everybody can see that. I'm going to go ahead and hit.
Hello, my name is John Scorsone, and I'm president of Solar America. We're one of the nation's premier solar developers. We've been developing solar since 2009, and we are a proud solar company of Pennsylvania. However, we do projects all over the country. And I'm here to talk a little bit about our full support of green amendments around the country that gives the public the right of clean water and clean air. And I want to talk a little bit about some misinformation apparently going around that such amendments, these green amendments, being proposed in other states other than Pennsylvania and Montana and New York, which are already they've been passed and have never, to my knowledge, have caused solar or wind or renewable energy projects to be held up in any way. Since, I'm hoping the public can use a little bit of common sense that solar energy is renewable energy and does not pollute in any way. And in fact, is used around the country for such places as brownfields and other polluted areas where they can turn a polluted landscape into a renewable energy producer. So I'm here again to try to educate the public that these amendments are good for the public. They are great for renewable energy, since renewable energy is really the only energy proposed that can actually meet these amendments and guarantee clean air and clean water and no pollution. And quite frankly, obviously, solar is one of the only ones that can possibly provide that guarantee to the public. So I'm in full support of such amendments, and I wanted to thank the people who allow us to get the information out. And I've urged the public to please ignore the propaganda that says green amendments are bad for green energy. It just doesn't make any sense. Thank you, and Happy New Year's to everybody.
Wonderful. I am now going to pass it off to Pamela Darville and Wendy Greenspan, who will talk to us more about their work with Power Interfaith and their advocacy for clean energy using Pennsylvania's Green Amendment.
Okay. Thanks, Shaylin. So my name is Wendy Greenspan, and I am in Philadelphia. And I am a volunteer with an organization called Power Interfaith. And along with my colleague, Pamela Darville, we work together on the Climate Justice and Jobs team. We're going to share with you how Power Interfaith uses the Green Amendment in its advocacy. We'll share with you our 2 utility justice campaigns, both of which are working to transition our electric utility and our gas utility to affordable renewable energy. Pam will talk a bit about the Pennsylvania Clean Power Coalition and how one of the members there used the Green Amendment to provide support for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI. She'll also talk about how we have been educating the public about Pennsylvania's Green Amendment and how it is a superpower. And then finally, with all of these efforts, we have never received any kind of criticism or pushback in the use of the Pennsylvania Green Amendment. And Shaylin, if you could put up those slides. So as I said, we are part of Power Interfaith. Power is a multiracial, multi-faith statewide organizing coalition. We are organized in 200 congregations across Pennsylvania, and we are working to create racial and economic justice on a livable planet. Some of the main campaigns that Power has been involved with are the Live Free team that works on criminal justice reform, the Education Equity team that works for fair funding in public schools, the Economic Dignity team that works on a living wage and workers' rights to unionize, and then the team that Pamela and I are part of, the Climate Justice and Jobs team. And Shaylin, you can turn off the slides at this point. So I'm going to tell you about the People's Energy Plan campaign that I've been directly involved with. Power in this PEP campaign led a coalition of 6 environmental groups to intervene before the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. And this was regarding the energy procurement plan of PECO. PECO is the electric utility in Philadelphia and surrounding counties. And this energy procurement plan that they have to submit to the PUC every 4 years is called the Default Service Program. With the intervening with this coalition of 6 groups, we won an agreement from PECO to issue its first ever power purchase agreement, PPA, for actual solar energy, not just energy credits. And as a result, PECO's PPA will result in a 25 megawatt solar facility in Pennsylvania, which will power an estimated 3,000 homes. Now, to be perfectly honest, 25 megawatts is not a big number, but it's very significant that this is a historic moment, a historic movement for PECO to begin to add actual solar energy generated in Pennsylvania. So it's a really, really important proof of concept. And we were really very happy to have that come about. So The coalition that Power led had an expert witness who testified before the Public Utility Commission, and he relied on Pennsylvania's Green Amendment to support his testimony. And his arguments were based on three things. One was environmental concerns, second was economic concerns, and then the third was in establishing the responsibility and identifying the Pennsylvania PUC as a trustee. So regarding environmental concerns, he said, quote, "Climate change and its consequences pose physical, economic, and other threats of harm to all the citizens of the Commonwealth today and in the future. PECO's supply mix is heavily dependent on fossil fuels that are causing and worsening the climate change problem." He also addressed economic concerns, and honestly, I think this is where this was the most persuasive argument, because the PUC and the utility are really focused on economic arguments. So he said, quote, "Addressing the legacy problems of climate change will cost money, and renewable resources provide an important affordability benefit that can mitigate the costs of climate correction." And then finally, his third area that he addressed was establishing responsibility and identifying the PUC as a trustee. And he said, "The Commission's trustee obligations under the Environmental Rights Amendment reasonably include, in my opinion, giving due consideration to whether PECO's DSP generation supply mix will worsen or mitigate the threats posed by climate change." So our expert witness found it very helpful to use Pennsylvania's Green Amendment to support his testimony. But I would say almost equally important, members of the public also relied on that. We had two very well-attended public hearings before the PUC. About 175 people attended. And I'll just give an example of language that one of those members of the public used to support their testimony. He said, "Pennsylvania has a responsibility to keep its citizens safe, and that includes from a health perspective and also to guard against the impacts of a changing climate. In fact, this responsibility is enshrined in the PA Constitution under the Environmental Rights Amendment." So in summary, the Pennsylvania Green Rights Amendment was very impactful on this campaign. Not only was our expert witness able to use it very effectively, but ordinary members of the community were able to bring it to the public hearing and support their testimony as well. And I will now pass it on to Pamela.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. My name is Pamela Darville. I'm the co-chairperson of Power's Climate Justice and Jobs team. And I'm also a co-convener for the Philadelphia Gas Works Just Transition campaign. And what Power is doing with this campaign is we're trying to move PGW towards the use of clean energy, to move it away from the use of fossil fuels. So how do we do that? We look at their budgets. They have an operating and a capital budget. And we determine whether they're spending funds to make a successful and an effective transition away from the use of fossil fuels. Essentially, we want the gas company to engage in and provide affordable and renewable energy. So when PGW goes before the Philadelphia Gas Commission to have their budgets reviewed, there's an opportunity for the public to appear and make comment. Power members are usually present along with other members of the public, ratepayers. And frequently we refer, I know I do, to Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, and that the gas company, along with the Philadelphia Gas Commission, they're trustees They are trustees under Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, and they have the obligation, they have the mandate to provide clean air. We also look at how can we educate the public. As Wendy said, we've engaged in education. We held in April of last year a panel discussion regarding Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, which we deem to be a superpower, and it is. As Maya stated early on, just talking about it, it's one of the more powerful amendments in the country. And we had a panel comprised of Casey Manahan, who's on this call this afternoon, our attorney who's with Earth Justice, who was involved in the township of Marple Township versus the Pennsylvania Public Utilities Commission, in which the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court reversed the Public Utility Commission's decision that PECO, the electric company that Wendy talked about, our electric company, could not build a gas facility in the township without taking into consideration the environmental impact of building such a facility. And I don't know if it's been appealed, but the court was pretty much stating to the Public Utility Commission that you are a trustee and that you have to determine whether your action has an environmental impact in this case. And they did it again in a rate case. PGW routinely will request an increase in the rates that they charge customers. And Power, along with allies and partners, opposed the rate. And we were all successful in substantially decreasing the rate. But more importantly, and this is the first time I think that this has happened, the Public Utility Commission acknowledged its role as a trustee and stated that it had jurisdiction, even in a rate case, to determine whether there was an environmental impact in line with the Pennsylvania's Green Amendment. And finally, Power is a member of a coalition, a state coalition, the Pennsylvania Clean Power Coalition. And one of our partner organizations in the coalition brought a case involving our regional greenhouse gas initiative on appeal. It's been appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And they used the argument, they used the Pennsylvania Green Amendment to state that Pennsylvania has to be a member of this initiative. It's a cap and trade initiative to reduce the amount of carbon emissions in our environment. And that's and I just want to stress, the Pennsylvania Green Amendment is a mandate. You know, it's something that you cannot choose to do. And we've used it throughout our advocacy. We will continue to use it throughout our advocacy. And as Wendy stated, we've never received any negative feedback in our use of the Green Amendment. We first heard about it with Maya's movement for the generations. And that's why we had the panel discussion and we invited Casey. And we were very pleased with how that panel discussion turned out to be. And we're an advocacy group. We use different strategies, and the Pennsylvania Green Amendment is one of them. So I want to thank Maya for inviting Wendy to this event. We looked forward to it. We were excited, and we were happy to spend the time today. So I'm going to pass it to Shaylin for a video of youth voices. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pamela. Like was mentioned, now we're going to show a video of some youth voices, which further highlights how important green amendments are for addressing the climate crisis and future generations.
How few butterflies and other pollinators are around because they are in danger of being killed off by pesticides. We have only seen koalas and other animals in books because more and more wildlife is becoming extinct. Even the air and the sun is dangerous. If we continue to ignore the warnings, what kind of planet will our children have? My brother and I have tried to do our part in healing our planet, but it feels lonely when you can only make a small difference. By the time we are old enough to sit where you are, it will be too late. We are looking to you to take action now and take this first step in leading everyone in Connecticut to work together to make a better environment for us and future generations. Thank you.
What does a green amendment mean to me? Well, I have big plans for my future. As an activist, an advocate, and eventually a mother. And I can raise hell about how uncertain that future is. And I will. Trust me, I will. Because to me, a green amendment means stability. And it means securing a fundamental right to live and breathe and plan for a bright future without climate anxiety and without natural disasters getting exacerbated by climate change every year, and without environmental hazards wreaking havoc in our very backyards. And if I'm going to be doing this work for the rest of my life, then when I'm 93 years old, I want to look back at that work Then when I'm 93 years old, I want to look back at all the work it took for us to implement a green amendment in every state's constitution. And I want to find peace in knowing that my children and grandchildren will get the privilege of worrying about other things. Preferably without the existential dread of climate change.
My name is Vin Van Rossum, and I'm concerned about climate change because it destroys the environment that I like to spend time in, which is why I believe we need a green amendment in all 50 states so that we can have the right to clean air, a healthy environment, and clean water.
Wonderful. And now I would like to pass it off to Annika Van Rossum, who will talk to us more about the actors and groups who are behind some of the false narratives about green amendments and clean energy.
Thanks, Shaylin. Let me just pull up my slide. There we go. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yes, so my name is Annika Van Rossum. And I work at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and I am also a Green Amendment educator and advocate. Some of you may know me from my time in law school. In 2021, I was working on the New Mexico Green Amendment with a lot of grassroots groups, so that was a great time. So I'm going to be talking to you. I'm going to be referencing a specific paper. It's called Beyond, let me pull up the title, Beyond Dark Money, Information Subsidies and Complex Networks of Opposition to Offshore Wind on the U.S. East Coast. So it's going to be specific, and Shaylin's going to share the link to the paper if you want to take a closer look. So we're going to look into kind of some of the false narratives behind wind energy, but also that'll kind of show you when you hear certain groups talking negatively about the Green Amendment. This is going to kind of prompt you to take a second look at who's actually saying it, because it may not always be as clear as it seems. So currently, the way this mostly works is groups are paid to deny. And the rise of the anti-environmentalist and climate denial messaging in the US primarily comes from think tanks, fossil fuel interests, and foundations that are found more central to the conservative movement. And when I say central, I don't mean central politically, like more closer related to the conservative movement. And so they will basically fund local grassroots groups or even larger nonprofits with money. And that doesn't necessarily mean that especially with smaller groups or things like that, we're not saying that everything within that group is bought off, but perhaps it's just certain messaging they're being paid to peddle or being given more resources to do. And so here, the paper identified some of the fossil fuel grant makers that you will see handing out money to people. So we have some of them are very obvious: American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association. Some of you may have heard of the Koch brothers. So they have some foundations. And then there might be some that are more inconspicuous, like the State Policy Network. Doesn't sound so bad. But when you take a look closer, you find it gets a little bit sketchier. And so in this paper, one of the places that was identified, so they have categorized different think tanks and groups and grant makers as climate denying. So one of the think tanks that was categorized as climate denying, they didn't give the name of it. You might be able to find in the footnotes of the article again, is called, actually they found that in 2012, they created a PR campaign to hand out to local groups. Also, this photo on the side, you can see that is also from the paper, just a good visual, I thought. And so they found that this PR campaign was coming up with PowerPoint templates and document templates and spending money to hand that out to local groups, local grassroots or nonprofit or community groups, and having them hold educational seminars for the local communities or go to the state utility commissions and give them this information. And again, it's very clear, the strategy memo that was referenced in the paper that they found. So it said, quote, goals of the PR campaign, cause the targeted audience to change its opinion and action based on the messages. So the provided messaging. Provide credible counter message to the wind industry, disrupt industry message with countermeasures, cause subversion in message of industry so that it effectively becomes so bad no one wants to admit in public they are for it. Just like how, and then they kind of reference how wind has done that to coal by turning the words of green to black and clean to dirty, with the ultimate goal of changing policy direction based on the message. So again, it doesn't seem, when you first look at it, so nefarious, but when you kind of look at the tactics, they're really laying out for people, listen, this is how you're going to get people to not back renewable energy. And in this case, we're talking about wind specifically. And so let's kind of go into what the disinformation strategies are, so that when we're kind of going out in the world too, and if you see things coming up about the Green Amendment being bad for clean energy, and I'll talk a little bit about too some of the groups. This is kind of the tactics they use. As you can see, I've taken this cute picture of my dogs turning a very tiny thing into something much larger, but it's really not true. So one tactic, and I'm not going to give voice, just so we're clear, I'm not going to give voice to false industry narratives. So I'm not going to go give specifics. I'm just going to kind of tell you the concepts. So the paper lays it out a little bit better. So in the paper, they found out these different strategies that these campaigns use. So you have emphasizing the downsides, and that entails creating doubt by overemphasizing a possible negative impact of the project, and then they make it much, much bigger than it actually is, or they will use that, like another thing you can see later down as they talk about cherry picking. So they'll cherry pick that one negative thing and go, here you go. So you don't actually end up looking at the other negative impacts of the fossil fuel industry. Fake expert tactics, that is a big one. We have personally in the Green Amendment movement seen that, where they will take non-scientific organizations. Sometimes it actually is from people within these think tanks that are funding the groups. And so they will cite those, or they will cite speculative news articles and basically try to claim it's an expert analysis, which it's not. Logical fallacies, taking an inconsequential aspect of scientific research and then exaggerating it so that you can distract away from the main conclusions of the research. Misrepresentation, again, taking a kind of going back to emphasizing the downsides. You're taking a single thing that's been pointed out and then overemphasizing it and saying, well, this is actually the whole big problem. Red herrings, I think everyone's pretty familiar with. A deliberate diversion to take away from the issue at hand. And then kind of the technological optimism, the wishful thinking, the fossil fuel solutionism, a lot of these tie into each other. So to kind of explain that is they will talk about things like nuclear fusion, or we're seeing talk about hydrogen and saying, well, this is actually, if we get this on board, it is going to be so much better than any renewable energy you've ever seen, and blah, blah, blah. But really, truthfully, a lot of these industries are actually still tied to fossil fuels, or still use fossil fuels, kind of like how we heard for a long time that natural gas was going to be the bridge fuel. And yet we've seen nobody move away from natural gas. So when they say these, though, nuclear fusion is an example, they're not talking about how you have to get it from lab scale to real world scale. How many permits is it going to have to go through? How much safety testing is it going to have to go through? What are the health implications and the danger implications of people? And so they're kind of saying, in a perfect bubble world, these would be the great things. But really, in the world they're describing and where we are now, we have renewable energy that is on hand and ready to go and is better for our world. And again, this is from the paper. If you go to the link, you can kind of read more about the breakdown of this. So in the blue, we have, those are groups that are operating primarily local. And so this is kind of showing how they're all intertwined, and it doesn't necessarily mean funding, but it might mean membership. There are people on here who have represented different groups actually in anti-wind, not legislation, anti-wind lawsuits, or they get funding, or they've asked different individuals to come speak, or they share resources. So the blue is primarily local groups. Orange is individual actors. And so many of them are actually leaders or have represented these different groups. The red are groups supporting climate denial. And a lot of those are more kind of like think tanks. And gray is established entities that predated the offshore wind movement that didn't necessarily fit in the graph, but were kind of like part of it. And anything here you see with a thick black circle, so kind of closer off to the lower right side where the circles are a little thicker, those are groups that have received at least $20,000 from a lot of those problematic grant makers I discussed earlier. And this is just, again, a reminder, if you see things cropping up, it's really important that you look closely at who's actually saying it. The names can seem like maybe that's somebody who we think, oh, well, if they're against this and they know a lot about clean energy, but you really have to look who's saying it and why are they saying it? And are they being backed by somebody? Are they being bought by somebody to say that information? So again, just as recently in 2024, Reuters reported that about 20 local anti-wind groups have banded together to launch a national initiative to go against wind. And so I just end with, because actually in 2022, when we had the New Mexico Green Amendment passed, and in one of the House hearings, we did actually hear from a group called Americans for Prosperity, who came out and said they were against the Green Amendment. And of course, you would think, Americans for Prosperity, what a great name. They are actually backed and were founded by the Koch brothers. Of course, they did not mention it. So again, kind of taking a look at who's saying it and why, and it may not be as obvious right off the bat. And I just really thought it was interesting that the Americans for Prosperity say that they're mission is to empower every American to pursue their version of the American dream. And don't we all want a version of the American dream where we can have clean air and clean water and a healthy environment to live in? And I think that's the version everybody would like. So again, just a reminder to kind of look at who's saying what. And just because somebody is saying it's bad for clean energy, and maybe the name of the group sounds like, oh, they're a good environmental group, it might not actually be so clear, and these waters can get pretty murky. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Representative Joanne Ferrari from New Mexico.
Hi, thank you, Annika. And I'm Joanne Ferrari from House District 37 in Las Cruces, New Mexico. It's a southern part of the state. And I've been chair of the Radioactive Hazardous Materials Interim Committee and also a member of the Water and Natural Resources Committee. And part of my reason for running for the legislature was to protect natural health and beauty of New Mexico. And throughout this year, I've been consistently asked where I stood on strong environmental protections and advancing the New Mexico Green Amendment. And I'm always proud to say that I'm here today to say that I believe in the constitutional recognition and protection for the environmental rights of all New Mexicans. And we are at a pivotal moment for environmental protection and justice in our state. And we can see that our current laws are not properly protecting the state's water, air, and natural resources to the full extent, which are essential for the health, safety, and economy of our state. And I believe this resolution will help us provide critical and missing protections. Not all communities in New Mexico get the benefit of healthy water, air, soil, and environments. For many, environmental justice is an illusion, and it's time to end all forms of racism in our state, including environmental racism. And passing a constitutional right that entitles all people to equitable protection of and access to healthy environmental essentials of life, like water and air, is long past due. And robust advancement of good quality, clean energy initiatives and projects that puts New Mexico at the forefront of the international movement to address the growing climate crisis must be a top priority for our 2025 legislature, and an essential first and fundamental step for taking on this leadership role is passing the New Mexico Green Amendment. We need to kind of be the continued role model that we've seen from Montana, Pennsylvania, and New York and New Mexico to be the next state to pass this important resolution. And with that, I'd like to pass this on to Shaylin.
Thank you so much, Rep. Ferrari. It's so meaningful that you're here, share your perspective. Thank you also to everybody who is still with us right now and still watching the recording. Throughout all of the presentations, we've gotten some great questions in the chat and the Q&A box. If you've been holding on to your question, now's the time to ask it, because we're going to head into our panel question and answer period. You can ask a question about anybody's presentation and what they talked about today. And I'm excited to get it started. One of the first questions that I saw was from Paul S. relating to Maya's presentation. Oil and gas producing states sell their products to out-of-state entities. Can the Green Amendment impact the greenhouse gas production in the states in the sales of the out-of-state burning of those oil and gas fuels?
So I never want to say an absolute yes or an absolute no. As John said, when we raised the Pennsylvania Green Amendment in the in that challenge in 2013, nobody had done it before. And we did, and people questioned us and challenged us, and yet we were victorious and made a historic change in Pennsylvania and now for the nation in the founding of the Green Amendment movement as a result. But that being said, the Green Amendment impacts government officials and the actions and activities within the state where the Green Amendment is taking place. And so not wanting to predict the outcome, but I do think that you would have a hard time using the Green Amendment to stop the sale of an item that then is crossing state lines, and that it's across those state lines where the actions and activities are happening that are of concern to you. So, there may be a way to frame it, but because the amendment is about what is happening within the boundaries of the state, I think purely focusing on a sale to address something happening after the fact in another state may be difficult, but maybe somebody will come up with the right argument to do that. I don't know, Casey and John, if you have a different perspective or an additional contribution, but.
Well, I think a lot of times when it comes to selling things across state lines, you run into the Commerce Clause, right, of the federal Constitution. And the Commerce Clause, laws that are passed by the federal government pursuant to the Commerce Clause often preempt state laws, which means that the state can't regulate in that area. So, for example, the Natural Gas Act, we have natural gas pipelines that cross state lines, and to some extent, the state's authority to regulate those pipelines is preempted. But on the other hand, they have some authority under the Clean Water Act to provide limits on the construction of those pipelines. So it's really, really case specific, I would say. But I think in terms of producing the fossil fuels within the state, there's an opportunity for the state to impose some important restrictions on how that fossil fuel is actually extracted and produced.
I agree with Maya and Casey. I won't go in great depth, but I agree with you both.
Thank you. Another question that is geared probably towards Casey, Maya, and John's presentation is from Kim S. Rapid action to reduce greenhouse emissions will require upgrading the electrical transmission system. Will Green Amendment slow down these necessary upgrades?
Well, I can speak to that since my presentation was a little bit about project-specific issues. I think that similar to other clean energy technologies, the government is going to have to recognize, the state government is going to have to recognize that this transmission project is necessary for the build out of clean energy and therefore necessary or significant in their efforts to curb climate change. So as Maya discussed, that's going to be a plus in favor of the project. And then to the extent that the project has these other environmental impacts due to the siting of the transmission lines, those can be mitigated through a lens, through the Green Amendment lens. So I would say it would go through a similar review to the other types of projects I mentioned in my presentation, and as a climate necessary project.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, again, by doing the robust review, that allows the opportunity to mitigate or avoid some of the harms by addressing siting issues or construction practices. The Green Amendment may actually help avoid legal challenges that otherwise would be coming forward, right? That's number one. And then again, as Casey said, just to emphasize number two, the more robust reviews of the Green Amendment and the obligation to protect the substantive environmental rights of present and future generations, including the climate, will ensure a stronger defense in court if that's appropriate for the project.
Wonderful. I have a question for Pamela and Wendy. Since Power Interfaith is doing so much incredible work to address some environmental racism and trying to make sure that Black, brown, working, and immigrant communities and families have affordable and safe energy. In your opinion and experience, how is the Pennsylvania Green Amendment a tool to help get us closer to environmental justice, to achieving that?
Pam, you want to take that?
Well, one of the people we had as panelists in the panel discussion we had is an attorney who created a bipartisan coalition, and his group advocates the Green Amendment, particularly as it applies to historically neglected and abandoned communities of color. So what they do in that group, and what Power does too, is we will emphasize to agencies, to the Public Utilities Commission. It's Wendy explained in her presentation that they are a trustee, that there are customers, ratepayers, who are treated in a manner which they can't afford increased rates as far as gas and electricity. So the Green Amendment becomes useful as a basis for advocating for those communities that don't have the power to advocate for themselves. They don't have a voice. Wendy, you want to take some of this?
Yeah, just that the amendment does not specifically call out environmental justice communities, but it does say the people, and that includes everybody. And I think, the argument that there are communities who have been disproportionately affected should be considered, get special consideration, I think can reasonably be argued from the idea that this is for the people.
Excellent. Thanks so much. We have a question that just came in from Alex K. Our governor in Connecticut recently proposed expanding the role of nuclear energy. Has the Green Amendment been utilized concerning nuclear energy expansion in any state? What would be the type of issues?
So looking at the case law, I'm not aware of a legal challenge in Pennsylvania, Montana, or New York that involves nuclear construction of a new nuclear power plant based on Green Amendment claims. But if there were a proposal for a new nuclear power plant, the issues that one would be thinking about the siting, right? Often these nuclear power plants are being based right along river systems, along estuaries, in places and spaces that are very dangerous ecologically, but can also be very dangerous for people, right? There's the creation of nuclear waste, and what's going to happen with that nuclear waste on site, or is there going to be a transportation of that nuclear waste, across borders, down a river, through communities in order to try to take it somewhere else for disposal? And what are the implications of that? There are water quality issues. There are ecosystem issues, right? There are radioactive issues that are associated with nuclear power plants. In New Mexico, there's a proposal to take all the nuclear waste from all over the country, bring it to New Mexico in order to dispose of it next to environmental justice communities and indigenous communities that don't want them. That's one of the reasons why we're advocating for a Green Amendment in New Mexico, is because it could potentially be used to help those communities. So that's a little bit different than constructing a new nuclear power plant, but it is, one of the ways that we can one of the ways that we are thinking about Green Amendments in the reality of what is happening right now today, and how could a Green Amendment be beneficial for communities that are being impacted. And I see Rep. Ferrari just turned on her camera, and so maybe she wants to add something to that.
Yes, everything that you mentioned, because we do have certain areas of our state for a long time that have been sacrifice zones, or as you refer to them better as communities that are more burdened than others, that we need to help prevent or to mitigate any future decisions. And the Green Amendment would be just a perfect way to do that.
I think the only one other addition I want to make, and I don't know if Annika wants to speak to this, in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, this is an area where a hydrogen hub has been proposed that's supposedly dependent upon, it's being called the green hydrogen hub. It's really not, but one of the sources for energy for the hydrogen hub would be nuclear. Now, those nuclear power plants are not proposed for Pennsylvania, where we actually have a green amendment. They would be proposed primarily in New Jersey, where there is advocacy to get a green amendment. But because of the relationship between the nuclear power plant, all the issues I mentioned, but the relationship also between the nuclear power plant and the perpetuation of hydrogen, which is very dangerous when we're talking about the environment, community safety, and the climate, there could, if there was a green amendment in New Jersey, I could see it potentially being used. Not just potentially, I could anticipate that my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, would actually use a green amendment in that kind of context to seek protections from the proliferation of nuclear for the benefit of hydrogen.
Yeah, I mean, just to add so people know, actually, like one of the false narratives I talked about was this technological optimism. And so one of the things you do hear a lot in this space right now is that like hydrogen is the new clean energy and hydrogen's going to save everybody. But again, part of it is hydrogen, when they talk about, oh, it does this, they're really only talking about lab scale. We're not talking about full-blown industry right now. And from what we've seen at Delaware Riverkeeper Network, watching the Mach 2 Hydrogen Hub, which has yet to receive its funding, they still will not release full maps, but from what we've seen, they're likely going to be placed again in environmental justice communities. And some of the dangers are not just involved in, they're going to reuse old pipes, and hydrogen is very leaky. It has a much higher combustion rate than anything out in the world right now. And we're also talking about release of NOx, nitrous oxide, which is very dangerous for people's respiratory and brain health. So again, a green amendment would really help in addressing those issues, because if it's not safe for people, it shouldn't be out in the world. And so those are, again, a false industry narrative of this is really helpful, but it's really actually quite dangerous and very untested.
And I just wanted to add a couple of things. One, in the oil and gas world, we deal with radioactive waste. I mean, there's a lot of radioactivity that comes to the surface in the drilling process. We stopped a site from putting it directly into the rivers. It was putting it into the rivers for 10 years. And we measured the radioactivity in the water that was going in. It was off the charts. So the idea that there's a green amendment out there at least gave us some ability, if nothing else, as a catch-all. If there was no specific law they were violating, if there was no specific this, as advocates, we could raise the idea. It was an interesting issue. I won't take up a lot of time, but we actually went to the district attorneys representing the municipal waste place and had the DA sue us because they were forced to take the waste and dump it in the river. And under contract, they didn't want to, and they were afraid. So we had the DA sue us to stop us. And actually, I wrote the complaint for the DA to do it. And the idea too, it's not that long ago, but and I live, if you look at my mailing address, it's Cannonsburg, PA. We're not in Cannonsburg here, but it's a couple miles away. You Google Cannonsburg, PA, that's where all the radioactive waste from the Manhattan Project is buried. So it is still down the street here. And so you think back all that many years ago, could you do that today in Pennsylvania? That amendment would stop you in your place.
Thanks so much, everyone, for your contributions to that question. I've got one more that I think will lead into a nice wrap up for our forum today. There was a specific question in the chat box from Glenn about why labor unions and building trades in New Mexico would be against the Green Amendment. Would they not want clean air and water for their children? And I'm sure that has a specific answer given, the state-specific context, but I just want to open it up to everyone of, more broadly speaking, how can we talk with other people about green amendments and clean energy, and what is the best way to combat the false narratives about green amendments and clean energy and their impact on climate change?
I think we should start with the New Mexico representative. Is that fair?
great narrative that have been brought forth today are really going to be important ways to counter, how these are big corporations, just like they are for oil and gas. When you have big energy corporations, trying to convince everyone that, the Green Amendment is going to hurt their progress. We have now, more information about, how this hasn't stopped, people in Pennsylvania or New York and even Montana. So I think, addressing and trying to meet with them more and more at every point we can. And then for other legislators who are new to this session, who are supporting the Green Amendment, to arm them with these same narratives to be able to counter their arguments. So thank you very much for all of this, discussion and, points of interest. I'm sure will help New Mexico a lot.
Anybody else want to offer thoughts? Wendy?
I'll just jump in real quick. There certainly is opposition to the transition to green energy within segments of labor, but I just want to point out there's one encouraging thing happening in Pennsylvania. There's a new organization called Union Energy, and I'm just looking at their website, a collaboration between Pennsylvania AFL-CIO and Building Trades, teaming up with Cornell University. And they, it's a brand new organization, but they want to, a lot of the green energy jobs are non-union jobs, and they want to get ahead of that and make sure that the green energy jobs are union jobs with wages that can support families. So that's an encouraging development. It's brand new in its infancy, but encouraging in Pennsylvania.
I frankly think too as well. I think for anybody who engages in these conversations where you might hear false narratives, really, I think it's fair to just ask people point blank, why do you, if somebody says no, say, why do you not believe that people should have clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment for current and future generations? Because none of those other fundamental rights really come under question. We know why people should have the right to free speech. We know why people should be able to practice the religion of their choice. We know why people should have rights to their property. Why are the very foundations of living and thriving on this earth not something that people believe should be fundamentally protected and upheld? And so I really encourage you when you talk to decision makers to ask them to give you point blank reasons why they think no, if that's their answer. And I have at least experienced in mine. Usually if I hear it's a false narrative. It's not factually backed, and it's very incorrect. And so at a point too, it's just a real emotional and living conversation, and why they think people shouldn't have those things we need to live a healthy and fantastic life. So that's just my thought.
And, when we see these people come up and testify, really who we are seeing testify tend to be the declared leaders of the trade group or the union. And when we listen to the actual points that they are perpetuating, they are the false narratives. The things that I have heard in testimony coming out of those supposed leaders for union workers, right, for advocating for jobs and economic development, their actual talking points are the exact same talking points we hear out of the fossil fuel industry that we're hearing. It's these false narratives. And they're not actually talking about harm to job creation or good paying union jobs. They're saying things like a Green Amendment is undemocratic, right? Which of course is not true. It's the most democratic thing that you can do, right? We are using the people are using their constitution to amend their constitution to add their fundamental right, their cherished freedom of clean water, clean air, a safe climate, and a healthy environment. Or they perpetuate the talking point that this is going to take power away from the legislature and give it to the courts, which again, not true. A green amendment is actually ensuring that we are using the entire legislative process, including giving the people the opportunity to go to the courts when necessary to defend their rights. We are not displacing any branch of government. We are embracing all branches of government. Or the favored one I hear coming out of the mouth of these very testifiers is this will result in unintended consequences. They don't just define what those unintended consequences are. But the fact of the matter is the robust reviews that Casey, John, and I talked about ensure that when you have a green amendment in place, unintended consequences are the least likely thing that's actually going to happen, because you have a really good, solid, firm handle on what will be the ramifications, and your decision making is based on that. When we actually talk with the members of these groups, we actually find the membership is supportive. They do want and believe in their right to clean water, clean air, a safe climate, and healthy environments. And so one really has to question whether these I don't want to say self-proclaimed, but whether these testifiers coming forth, identifying them as speaking on behalf of the whole, whether or not they actually are doing so. And I would suggest to you that's not the case. And then finally, what we really need to do is we need to talk with people about the truth, about the facts, like we are today. We need to take on the false narratives, arm people with the real information, make very clear that when we protect our water, our air, our climate, our ecosystems, our biodiversity, our beaches, our flora, our fauna, our environments, we are protecting our people too. We are supporting good quality jobs, good quality economic development, the health and safety of all people, and the quality lives for present and future generations. So it's about having a heartfelt conversation based in truth, listening, and then sharing additional information, truth, facts, and perspective. And I think when we show the courtesy and the respect and the patience of listening and talking and trying to talk about the truthful narrative, I think we bring most people around. And if people aren't coming around, then unfortunately, more times than not, I think that I have found that they have some ulterior motive that's backing them. And so, right, I mean, I think that that's the long and the short of it. We just need to honor one another and recognize that we do all need clean water, clean air, a safe climate, and a healthy environment. And that's what a green amendment gives us. It doesn't take anything good away from anybody. It just ensures good for everybody.
Excellent. I think that's about all the questions we had, and such a beautiful note to end on as well. So thank you once again, everybody, for coming today. We will make this recording available on this action platform. I plan to send instructions on how to access it to everybody who registered for today. And if you have someone that you want to share it with, we welcome you to invite them to the platform as well. We want to keep all of this great content on here because, as Maya has mentioned earlier, we don't want to deliver any of it right into the hands of the opposition. And yeah, this action platform in this community is going to be a really great space where you can get true, trustworthy information about the Green Amendment and continue to have national conversations like this one. So thanks again, everybody.
Abby.